yeah, I put together just some slides and comments based on reading the summary of the report so far. And anyways, these are the kinds of things that I work on in the U.S., and I think these are a lot of the types of organizations, initiatives, projects, enterprises that the project has been interviewing. So, yeah, just after looking at some of the initial findings, one question that came to mind is, okay, you've kind of laid out this chronology of development, and the question that I have is whether social enterprises and social change organizations have almost an inherent responsibility or imperative to change the order of how they do things. Because if you're just a solo entrepreneur with a business idea and you don't really have any vision for change, a lot of times you can just plow forward and not consider entity formation or legal red tape until later on. You could just carry forward and do it. But there may be some things that are distinct about social enterprise and change making that require you to do something different. And one of those things, I guess Declan just mentioned, is noting that some of these projects don't just emerge from one social entrepreneur's idea. They come from a group of people creating an idea together. So the fact that you have a group of people already points to the need to have a clear conversation about what everybody's role is and how you make decisions together. But also, I'm just taking notes as I was listening. Noting that a lot of the organizations that you all have interviewed, since they require physical space, since they're in the realm of sort of climate change, impact reduction, they actually require creating physical space for things like solar panels and car shares, and the need for physical space again brings up the question of, okay, who is leasing this physical space, or who owns this physical space? And so again, you kind of have to do more formalization early on. But yeah, so I noticed the quote, we all love each other. I hear this a lot because I'm a lawyer and I advise clients, and I say, okay, what is this project that you're doing, and how do you make decisions? What kind of entity are you? And they'll say, we really don't have to adopt anything that formal because we all love each other, and nothing bad is ever going to happen. But then, now having been a lawyer for 7 years and having started things and then seen them explode into conflict and then help dissolve them, I'm very skeptical of this. And also, I hear people say a lot of times, well, we're not doing this to get rich. So I might encourage people to create some financial safeguards early on in their enterprise to make sure that it doesn't get sold out, or that somebody doesn't really take it in a direction of profit maximization. And they just, they shake their heads, oh, we don't have to worry about that. We're not doing this to get rich. So, some thoughts on that. It brings up the question, since profit maximization isn't necessarily the thing that motivates people to start these enterprises and organizations, it's not that they're starting it because they want to be 3 times as rich as the average person. It's probably this, if it's not profit maximization, what is it? It's the desire to have satisfying work that's changing the world and creating the community you want to live in, and you probably want to have a voice in your work and control and also have fun. And in order to do that successfully, I think the governance structure of the organization actually makes a big difference, of the feeling that you have agency in this organization to basically achieve all these things. So again, it points to the need for structure. I'm kind of being a stereotypical lawyer up here and saying, oh, you need structure, but I'm saying it for this, I'm saying you need structure so that you can have fun and achieve these things, not so that you can maximize your profits. But what it means is, yeah, everybody is behind the wheel of the organization. I think that's something that maybe is an inherent difference in a lot of social enterprises, is you're not just there as a job to make money, and you're not just happy if you get whatever salary. You want to have a lot of agency in your work, and to know that you can see the need for change around you and take on projects that will help affect that change. And so I just think a lot of social enterprises, new economy organizations, whatever you want to call them, do make the mistake of not adopting very clear governance procedures or conflict resolution procedures, and those kinds of things are even developing procedures for how do you have meetings, how do you bring up a proposal, How do you consider that proposal? What if someone objects to the proposal? Then what? These are all pretty important because, and yeah, you'll see a few slides. If you came on Monday night, you'll see a few of my favorite slides pop up a couple of times. One of the dangers is this tyranny of structurelessness that can happen in a lot of very informal organizations, is that you have very passionate entrepreneurs and a lot of people who maybe have a greater sense of entitlement or stronger voice. They tend to kind of pop in and, with their ideas and their visions, and what ends up happening is you create hierarchies even if you don't intend to. So natural hierarchies will form if you don't have structure. So this phrase tyranny of structurelessness comes out of an article that was written in the 70s about the feminist movement, and just how a lot of feminist groups were rejecting structure because they didn't want hierarchy, but by rejecting structure they actually created hierarchy. So in a lot of the work that I do, we're trying to think about, okay, so we're creating structure, what is involved in that structure? We are learning a lot from Elinor Ostrom and other scholars who look at the commons and looking at throughout history, how have communities been able to successfully come together, create projects collaboratively to manage resources that are important to their lives, and what are the factors that have made them successful? Elinor Ostrom, who got the Nobel Prize in Economics, came up with a list of 8 or actually more factors that she saw as being really key to the success of of managing commons. And so yeah, some of it is ensuring highly accessible conflict resolution rates so that as tensions begin to creep in, you can address them pretty quickly. Having participatory decision making, so involving as many of the stakeholders in the decision making as you can, which requires some thoughtful work in your governance structure. Monitoring by people who are accountable to the group. So making sure that if you are adopting structures like this, that you have people who are paying attention and making sure that you're adhering to them, because this is one of the most common things that I see in organizations is people do go hire lawyers, they get governing documents and bylaws and all these fancy looking legal documents, and then they put them in a drawer and they don't read them and don't follow them, and that's actually pretty dangerous. So making sure that you remain accountable to those structures that you create. Yeah, and then one of the things that Elinor Ostrom has said is just for larger groups, create multiple layers of nested enterprises. So it kind of keeps group sizes small. And so as you're growing an organization, creating structures that allow decision making to flow up from below, because I think in a lot of organizations as it grows, sort of throughout the last 100 years or so, you create a hierarchy and you create all these layers of management and you have a lot of top-down decision making. But I think something that will be unique to a lot of the enterprises in the new economy is building a structure so that ideas will constantly flow up from below and initiatives can be taken from below rather than having all decisions be made from high places. Another note about this comment that I hear from a lot of people of, oh, we're not doing this to get rich, is that, well, a lot of these projects they will struggle financially. They will struggle financially. Individuals will be financially stressed. Most people are not going to I think most people will not get to the point in their lives where they feel like this is the level of economic stability that I always wanted. I think we're all going to struggle to get there. And I see a lot of organizations and enterprises drift away from their mission because they become solely focused on this need to earn enough money so that I can buy a house and get my second car and get my kids into college and fund my retirement, and then I'll start to change the world. And so I work with organizations a lot to ensure that they embed a lot of financial principles into the organization from day one to prevent a lot of those kinds of mission drifts from happening. Yeah, just kind of making clear decisions about when you do start to have earnings, how are you going to use them? If you have people who are investing capital in your enterprise, how are you going to incentivize and reward that capital, and how can you limit the return on that capital so that your enterprise doesn't just become a wheel of a machine that generates the maximum profits for those investors? So what is a reasonable return on investment? I've had a lot of funny conversations where like I've talked to a venture capitalist and say, yeah, I just think a lot of organizations can't maintain their social mission unless they put a cap on the return to investors. And one venture capitalist is kind of nodding her head and saying, yeah, I think there are a lot of venture capitalists who would just settle for a 10 times return. 10 times what you put in? I mean, that's just what they conventionally expect, but I had something different in mind, like 5%, reasonable interest rate. Anyway, so, when you create an organization, building into your articles, your bylaws, some limits on people's ability to maximize the return, I think is very important. Building in safeguards to prevent the entity from being bought out in the market, because if you create an organization that's doing a lot of good in the world, and it's very popular, and it's making money, then something could happen to it very easily, which is a business could say, oh, this looks good, if we buy it, we're going to look good, and we'll probably make more money. So I did a lot of thinking and work to try to figure out how can we keep a change-making organization from being bought out. And this is just an example that I'm really mad about, which is Couchsurfing. Used to be a nonprofit organization, and the tagline was "Better World Through Travel" or something like that. It was an idea of you can go and stay on people's couches and stay with them for free. It was a group-based platform, and it's about cultural exchange and getting to know people and sharing. And the founders sold the nonprofit, they sold the assets, meaning the website and the brand and everything, for $600,000. And then immediately got about $7 million of investment into the new for-profit Couchsurfing, and not $7 million, a lot. Well, in any case, let's just say the founders are very wealthy now, and that shouldn't have happened. So it brings up the question of how do you prevent that from happening? Even a nonprofit, legally, that shouldn't have been legally possible, but nobody challenged it at the time. So you really almost have to build a fortress around what you're doing to make sure it doesn't get bought by a for-profit company later on. And then the question of wages is really important, because if people are going to do this in the long run, of course they need to make a livelihood from it. How do you determine what are reasonable wages for those people who are working? I really urge organizations to come up with some sort of index that they can refer to decide how much should someone get paid, so that in the U.S., we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, numbers about what the average person makes in those positions, or we look at the average wages in a particular city. My organization has set our wages to what the average person in Oakland, California makes. So everybody in my organization makes $47,000 a year, because that's what the average person in Oakland makes. So these things help to prevent, even in nonprofit organizations, executive directors or certain people in higher positions can really start to negotiate for higher and higher wages, to the point where the organization, in order to sustain those higher wages, is focusing a lot of its time, or the majority of its time, on fundraising. So creating some limits around wages, I think, is important. I also more and more urge organizations to consider paying everybody basically the same wage, because it's worked so well in my organization. It creates a sense of ownership for everybody, and it recognizes the fact that everybody is growing, everybody is enhancing their skills over time, taking on more and more responsibility. Everybody's vision is important to the organization in the sense that they can bring ideas and projects to the organization. And if everybody has that kind of power and growth potential, then why should one person be making more than another? A lot of resentments also creep in when you have different wages. So, yeah, that was a lot about money and organizations. But new economy organizations, social enterprises, I think in particular, more so than conventional businesses, if you don't sort these things out early on, then later on when you think, oh, we need to sort these things out, it's like trying to push toothpaste back into the tube. Because already people are thinking, oh, we can make a lot of money from this. It's hard to then adopt a policy that limits how much money you can make from it. Or if you're already in a big, huge conflict and having a fight with the people that you started it with, it's really hard at that point to adopt conflict resolution mechanisms. And so yeah, I think social enterprises maybe need to almost reverse some of the order in which they do things. And so that brings up the question of, well, isn't that going to be awful and boring, trying to adopt all these formalities early on And so I guess a lot of the work that I do is trying to make the law fun, trying to make it feel very accessible, reduce the barriers to understanding the law as much as I possibly can. And so here's the stages of progression again. I think that what we just need to do is make the bottom part as much fun as the first part, because coming up with ideas and visions and talking about it with your friends and saying, yes, let's go get a space and start a co-working space or whatever, that part's really fun. It would be great if you could have as much fun while you're talking about what kind of entity it will be. And so you can host legal document parties. Actually, literally, I've had a lot of events mainly with interns and volunteers. I call them bylaws parties, just to really get everybody, really very hands-on and interested in the act of writing bylaws. That's what it actually looks like. But yeah, our organization last year had about 120 events. We have 8 staff members, 120 events. That's a lot of events. So pretty much every third day we were doing something where we were inviting the public in to do something related to the law with us. And oh yeah, one thing about legal documents is I think we also just need to start writing them from scratch so that they don't look like that, so that they actually use language that's meaningful to people. So starting from scratch, it could be a lot of fun, and it leads you to question the necessity of a lot of the concepts and language that we've been using in legal documents over time. But anyways, one of the events that we host, one of the types of events that we host constantly, we call it the Resilient Communities Legal Cafe. We do it 3 times a month. So we basically set up a space. It could be a room like this with a lot of tables, and we put up tablecloths, or we actually maybe sometimes go to a cafe and do it there. But we have, it's basically a walk-in legal advice clinic where we always have to have at least a few lawyers there who have enough expertise to give advice on the spot. And so that's a major hurdle to starting any sort of walk-in legal advice clinic. But once you have that, you can do a lot of wonderful things. You can involve law students, you can have community members, and you have learning flowing in all directions. You have clients coming in and teaching you what they're doing. You have law students learning and giving ideas, even if they can't give legal advice yet. They bring a lot of ideas around business strategy and marketing and that kind of thing to the table. And you just have a grand old conversation about the ideas that people have. So we almost wish that in the moment that someone thinks, I want to start a worker-owned composting cooperative, that within the week they walk into our legal cafe and tell us about it so we can help come up with ideas and help point out any red flags they might have around regulation and point them in some good directions around the legal structure. Here are some photos of us actually doing this. There's an actual coffee shop where we do it. This is a maker space where we do it. You can see there's actually a sewing machine on the desk where I'm giving legal advice. And over the last 2 years that we've been doing it, we've had definitely over 100 different volunteers of all different backgrounds, lawyers, non-lawyers. Sometimes we do it outside. We also we haul around a giant, we call it the Resilient Communities Law Library. It's about half law books and then half books about community resilience. All with the goal of just kind of bringing this down to earth to people. And I was also just reading an article by Sam Caroline. Is that your last name, Caroline? Yeah, about just the need to treat the legal system as a commons and to make it sort of feel like this is something that's for all of us. And the article is saying, some people are just afraid to open their mail. They see anything that looks like a legal document, they want nothing to do with it. And so we want everybody to kind of feel like, oh, this is fun, what's this? And oh, how can I solve this problem? And just have a really good time figuring it all out. We have a lot of teach-ins. Maybe about twice a month we'll have a teach-in where either we have a discussion or teach a workshop. This is one where we were talking about urban agriculture and the law. Or we invite other people in, other lawyers or law firms to come in and teach workshops. There's one we just recently did on crowdfunding. We also once a month have these happy hours where we get lawyers and social entrepreneurs all in the same bar and have fun together. So again, building those social connections. helping everybody realize that lawyers can be fun too. And yeah, and we have a critical mass now that just, we've been able to connect with so many people in our community. And I was noticing something else that either Caroline or Declan was saying about the fact that once you, what were you saying? Like you have a certain number of these enterprises, it makes a huge difference. Like the 20 social enterprises can change the world. But, so we have that sense of critical mass now. So you show up to one of our events and you start to get this feeling like everything's a social enterprise, everything's a cooperative. This is the way to do everything. And so getting people all together frequently is a good idea. We also just invite a lot of people for lunch and lunch discussions. That's Peter Barnes, who's written a lot of books about the commons, founder of Working Assets. We actually put the menu up on the board of, these are things we should talk about during lunch. And so we started a worker cooperative academy. This is groups of people who are forming worker cooperatives getting together on a weekly basis to work through the process of starting their worker cooperative, work through the legal issues. It was a 12-week program. So we also have events that are just for lawyers. And we have a program that includes about 11 lawyers right now who are starting their own law practices to do this work. And yeah, that brings up something that we need to say about lawyers, which is, yeah, we need a lot of lawyers to help create this movement. And I think a lot of it will imply that we need to rethink a lot of the ways that lawyers work and how people become lawyers and what lawyers charge. And the lawyers involved in the change making in this case, some of them will be litigators, going to court. Some of them will be policymakers, because we definitely need to change a lot of laws. Although you don't have to be a lawyer to change laws. And that's something that I'm trying to tell everyone, is everyone should be involved in changing laws. There'll be academics, but I think very much so there will be a lot of what I call transactional lawyers, people who deal in contracts and entity formation and help understand and navigate regulations, or who understand tax. And I never thought I'd be a transactional lawyer because I thought, oh, they're all just greasing the wheels of giant businesses, and the giant businesses are the ones that are destroying the world, they're destroying our local communities. Why would I ever be a transactional lawyer? But I am one now, and I realize that's actually one of the most powerful things you could do as a lawyer, is just help recreate the economic system that will replace the one that's destroying the world. And so greasing the wheels now of things like this. And there is a role to play for all kinds of lawyers in creating these things. But it has implications for how lawyers practice, because this is in the United States. The American Bar Association has said that the middle 70% of society is really not getting its legal needs met because, as was said here actually as well, people are intimidated by lawyers. They're afraid lawyers are going to be expensive, and they aren't too expensive by and large in the United States. And a lot of that is because lawyers have gotten very comfortable serving the wealthiest sector of society. They're kind of crawling all over that pile of wealth. This is the allocation of wealth in the U.S. is the top 20% of people control 93% of the wealth, and that's how they keep lawyers so busy, and that's how lawyers have come to believe that they're worth, $500 an hour. But I like to get back to, why do we have lawyers to begin with? And we have the American Bar Association, even has rules of our professional conduct, which should remind us, although we should read them more often, that lawyers play a vital role in the preservation of society. We have a responsibility for the quality of justice, create access to the legal profession. So we kind of messed up big time by not doing a lot of these things, by creating a world where pretty much the majority of people don't have access to justice. And the other thing to say about that majority of people, that 70%, is they're the ones who are probably going to change the world. Probably a lot of people who are interviewed for this project are part of that 70%. They're not the people in society who are experiencing the most poverty or in the most desperate point in their lives or in the space of crisis. They have enough to work with that they can start something and create something new, and they have an interest in creating a new type of economy. They are the ones who create these types of enterprises. So lawyers need to serve that 70% so we can help them change the world. And, at one point in my career, I realized that some of my clients only earn $500 per week. I don't know the currency exchange exactly right now, but it's very little. They're a hotel cleaning cooperative, so I have a catering company, worker-owned catering company that I work with. They make about $500 a week. But I also have lawyer friends who make $500 per hour. And just the idea that any one person is 40 times more valuable than any other person, it's just, we really just need to question this. We just need to question this a whole lot more. And my goal is to kind of re-envision lawyers as a little bit more average people, because if you decide, oh, I'm going to be an average person and earn an average salary, then average people could actually probably afford your services. So that's been my goal, and I think I'm hoping to create a vision that we could all actually be happy as lawyers if we do this. So I started my own law practice. This is different than the Sustainable Economies Law Center, which takes up most of my time, but 7 years ago after law school I started this law practice, and my goal was to just be a very approachable community, small city lawyer, not exactly small town lawyer, but more. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do with my career. I'm just going to be a small town lawyer and help people create groovy local organizations. Of course, then people start inviting me to speak in Europe and then write books, and then things kind of got out of control, and I don't really do that so much anymore, but still, that's a really viable vision for a lot of lawyers. And especially in the US, I really encourage a lot of lawyers to start their own practices, and I try to really break down, what does it mean to be a lawyer? It's not a big, complicated thing to start your own practice. You don't need a receptionist and your name on the door. You don't need a fancy phone system. You don't need all the diplomas on the wall. You don't need to dress all fancy. You don't need to use big words. You don't even need to have necessarily an office. This is what I look like when I practice law. And there's a lot of really wonderful work we can do with very few resources. I noted, and that's just one of my favorite quotes about lawyers, to make your skill in the law be a blessing to your neighborhood. I wonder, for the UK, I know it's not easy to start your own law practice, and you can't even really begin to practice law until you've worked in a law firm and gotten a certain amount of experience. So maybe it's a question that you want to be asking yourself is, do you want to enable more lawyers to just be able to start up their own shops right out of law school, or to just make it easier? I also think that the insurance requirements for lawyers in the UK might be preventing people from doing this. I'm not legally required to carry malpractice insurance, so it just makes it all the more doable for me to set up a very casual law practice and serve clients with low fees. So I have a lot of optimism for the legal profession as a whole, because I think a lot of lawyers can shift their areas of practice to doing this work. I think law schools will hopefully come around and start teaching us how to do it. And I think it will make lawyers happy as well, because we're creating the world we want to live in. I learned this from Morag the other day. Morag McDermott, I guess you're going to speak in a little bit, but that even non-lawyers can give legal advice in the UK, and you have the Citizens Advice Bureaus, so that's a really powerful thing. You're very lucky. So that means that even if it's hard for lawyers to go out and start their own practices, non-lawyers can learn a lot of this and empower their communities. So you can, get your own desk kit and learn how to use those big legal words if you want. So you can dress up as a lawyer. Anyways, and there are a lot of different ways that you could specialize. It's not a big, overwhelming field. If you just learn about the laws related to child care cooperatives, or you just learn about laws related to shared housing, you could do a lot of good for your local community. And we also need to change a lot of laws. I'm just going to talk through this very quickly, just about how legal barriers come up. You guys don't have earthquakes here, do you? Anyways, so here's a person just having a community soup night and asking friends to bring a side dish. But if this person was having a party and they decided instead of asking people to bring a side dish, they want people to bring $4, then as soon as money comes into play, it starts to look like you're operating a business. And as soon as you look like you're operating a business of any sort, there are all these legal hoops to jump through. Legal hoops that basically cost a lot of money to jump through. And they're good laws, like they help prevent us from getting sick and catching on fire and so on. But a lot of people can't comply with them because they're too expensive. And this person who's having a soup party is not starting a giant soup business or even a small business or a micro enterprise. Maybe you could say, oh, she's starting a nano enterprise. But really, a lot of what she wants to do is just share and provide for her community. And I think that's what a lot of social enterprises are trying to find new ways to provide for people's needs, to provide food, provide energy, transportation, housing, in ways that kind of are in a gray area between just providing for oneself, operating a business. It's kind of right in between. There's sort of a gray area between the personal and commercial realm that has huge potential for creating new local economies. And so these community stew nights where people might bring money and chip in for the costs. Is it a business? Is it just people cooking for themselves? It's a gray area, and that gray area or green area has a lot of potential, and the legal system doesn't really know what to do with it. So you're going to find that a lot of people are coming together, they're collaborating, they're formalizing these projects to provide for one another, and they can't because they're running up against legal barriers, or they're in realms of legal uncertainty. So similarly, having a car is different from operating a car rental company. But we need community members to get together and share cars so we can get a bunch of them off the road. So if you have a neighborhood car sharing club, is that a car rental company? Or is that just people sharing a car? And what regulations apply? Same with carpooling, a lot of people do that. It's different than operating a taxi cab company. But yeah, what if people want to share the costs of riding around together? We need to fill those empty seats in cars. And this guy is not an Uber driver. It's just somebody who's giving a friend a ride to work but wants a little money for it. So we need to do this, but the regulatory realm is very uncertain. Overall, we just need to bring a lot of these legal hoops down to earth, which means changing a lot of laws. And there are a lot of different strategies for changing laws, but I think a lot of them are just around creating exemptions for small-scale economic activity, for economic activities that entail very low risk or that are very cooperative in nature. And I think you just need to start looking at every single law, especially every time you start a project and you come across a barrier. Look at the laws with the lens of, is this law designed for small-scale business? Is it designed for cooperative business? And a lot of times you'll find, no, this law was not written with this in mind at all. So how do you change that? How do you change it without opening doors to exploitation is a really hard question. You have to build boundaries around laws. So we passed a law in California that says you can sell certain foods that you make at home, but they have to be foods that aren't refrigerated, like bread and jam and other things that are not prone to poisoning people. And yeah, the child care cooperatives, for example, if it's no more than 12 children and no more than 9 parents involved, they're exempt from child care licensing laws in California. So that's recognizing that if it's a group of people, it's small, it's collaboratively run, you don't need to make them jump through all the same legal hoops as a regular business would. So, and we need to create incentives. We need to identify, well, what is a cooperative and why does it benefit our community? And once you identify that, then local jurisdictions should be pouring a lot of resources into helping them start. So I'm happy to share these slides as well. Everybody's trying to take notes, but I want to empathize with the fact that I think a lot of what social entrepreneurs are doing right now is very hard. Whatever you're starting, whether it's a cooperative or social enterprise, it feels like pushing a giant rock up a hill because you encounter all these barriers. But I think we'll get to a tipping point once we do a lot of these things over here on the blue side. It's not just removing legal barriers, it's growing the literacy of the community around us to say, why should you buy a vegetable box from a local farm as opposed to just going to a local large grocery chain. So growing that understanding among consumers, creating new financing opportunities, creating actual incentives in public policy, and I think we keep doing those. We keep sort of hitting on all these little things. We'll get to a tipping point where it's actually easier and obvious to create an organization that's a change-making organization that has social and environmental purposes. So there. This is just my final slide, which is my book. If anybody's interested, I also brought a copy on the table here, and some of our legal resource libraries, and that's my organization, the Sustainable Economies Website. Okay.